How did ancient humans navigate without maps, compasses, or GPS? Picture this: no roads, no signs, no phone in your pocket buzzing with directions. Just you standing at the edge of a forest that stretches farther than you can see, needing to reach a place hundreds of miles away, a place you've never been that no one you know has ever drawn a picture of, and somehow you make it there. Not by luck, not once, but over and over, for generation after generation. This is not a hypothetical. This is exactly what ancient humans did, constantly, for hundreds of thousands of years, using nothing but their own senses and a body of knowledge so precise it still leaves modern scientists stunned. And by the end of this video, the way you look at getting lost is going to change completely, because it turns out, for most of human history, getting lost was almost never an option. Let's start with the biggest myth to bust right away: the idea that ancient humans wandered aimlessly and just got lucky. Nothing could be further from the truth. Long distance travel, migration, and trade among ancient and early modern human groups was intentional, repeated, and remarkably accurate, sometimes over distances of hundreds or even thousands of miles. To understand how, we need to break down the actual tools they had, because it turns out they had far more than we usually give them credit for. The first and most fundamental tool was the sky itself. Long before anyone wrote down astronomy, humans were tracking the sun's position throughout the day to maintain a constant sense of direction. The sun rises roughly in the east and sets roughly in the west. Simple but powerful when you're moving across open terrain for days at a time. At night, the tool shifted to the stars. In the northern hemisphere, a fixed point in the sky, what we now call Polaris, the North Star, barely moves as the rest of the sky rotates around it. Ancient hunter-gatherer groups and later more organized cultures identified this fixed point and used it as a reliable compass, something you could check every single night without fail, as long as the sky was clear. But here's where it gets more impressive, because relying only on the sun and stars has an obvious weakness. What happens on a cloudy day or in the deep? Do you go tell me in a dense forest where you can't even see the sky? This is where ancient humans developed something even more remarkable: environmental reading, an intimate, inherited knowledge of the landscape itself as a directional tool. Take moss growth on trees, something people still repeat today as folk wisdom, even if the details often get exaggerated. In many environments, certain plant growth patterns are genuinely influenced by exposure to sunlight, wind, and moisture, which vary depending on direction. Experienced trackers didn't rely on a single sign like this in isolation. They combined dozens of small environmental cues at once. Which side of a rock formation showed more weathering? Which direction dominant winds usually blew from in a given season? Where water tended to pool or flow based on the slope of the land? No single clue was perfectly reliable on its own, but stacked together, layer after layer of small observations, they created a picture accurate enough to travel by. Then there's something even more astonishing: memory as a mapping system. Ancient and indigenous cultures across the world developed what researchers now call songlines, memory maps, or oral cartography, entire travel routes encoded not on paper, but in story, song, and rhythm. In Aboriginal Australian cultures, for example, songlines describe routes across enormous stretches of land, embedded within stories passed down through generations. Each landmark along the way, a particular rock formation, a bend in a dry riverbed, a cluster of trees, had a specific place in the story, in a specific order, meaning that reciting the story correctly was, in a very real sense, following the map. Get the story right, and you'd arrive exactly where you meant to go, potentially hundreds of miles from where you started, without ever holding a physical map in your hands. This wasn't unique to one region. Pacific Islander navigators, particularly across Polynesia, developed one of the most sophisticated non-instrument navigation systems ever created by humans, allowing them to cross thousands of miles of open ocean, genuinely open ocean with no land in sight for weeks, and consistently find small islands that, from a bird's eye view, would be nearly invisible dots in an enormous expanse of blue. They accomplished this using what's called wayfinding, a combined system of reading ocean swell patterns which change and bend predictably around islands long before the island itself becomes visible, observing the flight patterns of specific seabird species which reliably travel out to sea in the morning to feed and return toward land each evening, watching cloud formations which often form differently above islands due to rising warm air, and tracking star paths memorized with such precision that navigators could hold an accurate mental compass through an entire multi-week voyage purely from memory, adjusting constantly as the stars rotated through the night sky across different seasons. Think about the sheer weight of that knowledge for a moment. This wasn't something one person figured out. It was an entire system, refined, tested, and passed down across countless generations, with real lives on the line if the knowledge was wrong. Get a long-distance ocean voyage wrong in Polynesia, and there was no rescue helicopter, no emergency beacon, nothing but the ocean in every direction. And yet, these voyages happened again and again and again, successfully, for centuries, before European sailors even developed reliable ocean-crossing instruments of their own. Now let's bring this back to land, and to something almost every ancient human on Earth eventually relied on: animal behavior as a directional and survival tool. Certain animals have highly predictable seasonal migration patterns, and ancient humans who lived alongside these patterns for generations learned to essentially read the landscape through the animals moving across it. Following herds wasn't just about hunting, it was about understanding with startling precision where water sources would be at different times of year, where safer terrain existed, and even where seasonal weather patterns were shifting, because animals often reacted to environmental changes before humans could perceive them directly. There's also something deeply human about how this knowledge was transferred, something modern navigation completely lacks: apprenticeship. A young hunter or traveler wasn't simply told, "Go this way." They were walked through the landscape repeatedly, often over years, by someone older and more experienced, who pointed out the same landmarks, the same seasonal changes, the same subtle environmental signs over and over, until the pattern became second nature, an intuitive, embodied sense of direction that didn't require conscious calculation at all. In many ways, it functioned less like following directions and more like recognizing a familiar face. You didn't think through each individual navigational decision, you simply knew. This raises a genuinely fascinating question that modern neuroscience has actually started investigating. Did this constant reliance on natural navigation change the ancient human brain itself? Some research into modern populations who still practice traditional wayfinding, certain indigenous groups in Australia, the Arctic, and the Pacific Islands, has found notably different patterns of spatial reasoning and memory compared to populations raised with modern navigation tools like GPS. It raises the possibility that ancient humans, who depended on this skill for literal survival across their entire lives, may have developed spatial awareness sharper in certain ways than most people alive today. Of course, it's important to be honest here. Ancient navigation wasn't infallible, and it wasn't free of danger. Groups absolutely did get lost. Sudden weather changes could obscure the sky for days. Unfamiliar terrain, especially during long migrations into completely new regions, carried real risk, and there's archaeological and anthropological evidence of exactly this kind of danger. A group's remains found far off an expected route, likely disoriented by a storm, thick fog, or unfamiliar landscape they hadn't yet learned to read. This is exactly why the systems described here weren't casual guesses. They were treated with extreme seriousness, refined over centuries, specifically because the cost of getting it wrong was so high. So what does all of this actually tell us? It tells us that map is a much older, much broader concept than a folded piece of paper or a glowing screen. For most of human history, the map lived somewhere else entirely, in memory, in story, in song, in the subtle language of wind, water, stars, and living creatures, passed from one generation's mind directly into the next. Our ancestors didn't need a device to know where they were or where they were going, because they had spent their entire lives being trained deliberately and carefully to read the world itself as the map. And here's the part that should really sit with you. Every single one of us alive today exists because that system worked, because somewhere in your ancestry, whether recently or tens of thousands of years back, someone successfully navigated an unfamiliar landscape without getting lost, without a compass, without a phone, using nothing but the sky, the land, and knowledge carried forward by the people who came before them. The next time your phone loses signal and your map app spins uselessly, remember, for more than 99% of human history, that was simply how everyone traveled all the time, and they didn't just survive it, they thrived on it, built entire civilizations on it, and crossed oceans most of us wouldn't dare attempt even today with every modern tool available to us. If this changed the way you think about how humans understood the world around them, you're going to want to see the video where we cover exactly how ancient humans predicted the weather days in advance, with nothing but careful observation, because what they were able to figure out is genuinely hard to believe. Subscribe if you want to keep uncovering the hidden knowledge systems that let ancient humans do things we still struggle to fully explain today, because the deeper you dig into how they actually lived, the clearer it becomes. Nothing about ancient life was primitive. It was precise, tested, and passed down at the cost of real lives. I'll see you in the next one.